Everybody, welcome to the third installation of the PHP Hasselt Meetup. My name is Jan Oris. I will be your speaker for tonight. Would like to say thank you first of all to Gabriel for hosting this event and for inviting me. Second of all, Pixel Hackerspace for giving us a space to actually host the event. Right. With that, I think I'll start. Let's see. All right. So today I will be giving an introductory session about Laravel. So Laravel, as you may know, is a relatively new PHP framework that has come up over the last couple of years and has made a lot of fuss and created a lot of turmoil inside the PHP world. So it's definitely worth discussing. My name is, as I said, Jan Oris. I'm working as a PHP developer in my own company. I'm a freelancer, and I've been using Laravel for over 2.5 years now. And it's my framework of choice. I've worked with other frameworks too, such as Symphony 2. I've worked with Zend, but Laravel is definitely up there for me. It's my personal preference, and I wouldn't change anything for the world when I'm working with it. So I think I'm qualified to actually tell you about it. So the first thing I need to address, I think, is why I chose this framework. Why is this framework so much more important to me or to so many people? Why is this so much better than all the rest, particularly if you consider that you have so many other contenders as well. So if you look on screen here, you'll see a bunch of other frameworks. Some are very old, some are very young. These are just the main contenders. There are so many frameworks out there. I think every 2 or 3 weeks a new framework is born with just a couple of hundred users. Symphony 2 is particularly very famous within the PHP community. It's a very solid framework. So with so many good candidates, why is Laravel so much better and worth looking into, actually? And whenever I have a question like this, the first thing I do is go on Google and I search for information about this framework and see what the fuss is all about. And when you look at the Google search trend for PHP frameworks, you see Laravel coming up about half during 2012, 2013, and having a very steep raise, which immediately tells us that there is a lot of interest for this framework, which further piqued my curiosity as to why that is and why is this so good. Additionally, if you take a look at a survey which was done by SitePoint. These are the results for end of 2014, if I'm not mistaken, or 2013 even. They did a survey among their members and asked them which was their preferred PHP framework. And a little over a year in its existence, it was a little bit older than that, but a year after the first major release was done, you see that Laravel has already captured the hearts of over 25% of the PHP audience that has subscribed to SitePoint, which is very significant if you see that it has already surpassed Symphony 2 by quite a large margin. They did this survey again earlier this year. I don't have the results here because it's not a nice, clear graph, but it basically confirmed what was already going on. Laravel is still the main contender amongst all countries, pretty much. The only big difference was that Falcon has pretty much disappeared. But the main picture that you have here is still the same today as of last month, actually, when the results of the survey were published. So again, for God's sake, this is not right. Again, another reason to actually keep talking about Laravel, because there is a lot to talk about. Now, I'm going to put this into context for you a little bit, because I think it's important to know where we're coming from here. This is Taylor Otwell. This is actually the guy that made Laravel in his garage, so to speak. And one of his main principles when he started building this framework was this quote, and this was usually, previously this was on the documentation main page when you actually went to Laravel.com. This is one of the first things you saw, which is that Laravel is a web application framework with elegant expressive syntax, and it's striving to make development as fulfilling and as enjoyable as possible. And that was really the main phrase that was blatantly obvious throughout the entire framework when you start working with it, and that's what pulled me to Laravel, and that's what got me to stay there, really. And I think that's a really, really very cool feature to have inside a framework. Because as so many of us, Taylor Otwell started out as a frustrated developer pretty much. He was actually a .NET developer when he originally got started, and he started to work with CodeIgniter. And as many CodeIgniter developers, he got frustrated with the tools at hand, and he started to create his own. And then things snowballed from there, and he combined a lot of the tools and tips and tricks and the good features of all the major languages that he knew, and he transformed them into what we know now as Laravel. So .NET from his previous employment, Ruby on Rails from reading on it, and CodeIgniter PHP bundled together with his own personal flavor and his own personal preferences. That is what we call Laravel today. Now, the first release was already 4 years ago, and it was basically just a combination of classes that he used throughout his projects. And it wasn't really a framework yet, it was just a bunch of modules, really. The second version was the first actual version of the framework, complete with templating engine, controllers, and everything. And it was only released to a small crowd, so no real big release. The first major snowball that was Laravel was actually Laravel 3, which was released early 2012, and that actually is what the engine, what propelled the engine, the rocket really that we know now. That was the first major release. Now, immediately they saw that they needed to rewrite the code pretty much because it was sturdy, but it wasn't good enough. It wasn't fast enough, and that is what they did with Laravel 4, which was released a little over 2 years ago now. And that was really the first major release of Laravel that really put it on the map and made it really famous inside the PHP community. Right now, we're at Laravel 5, and I see that's the wrong year. It was released last year, actually, which was the next step up for the framework, which is the current version that we have right now. Although we are all eagerly awaiting Laravel 5.1, which is due to be released in the next couple of weeks. It was actually scheduled for this month, although it seems less and less likely. But that's going to be the first long-term support release of Laravel, and is supposed to bring a lot of new changes to the framework as well. So that is where we are right now, and how things are going to be changing in the near future. Now, I'm not really going to give you a tutorial here. It's not my intention. There are a lot of resources out there, and I think they're way better at explaining this than I am. So what I'm going to do here is give you an overview of what the framework is, what it does, how it's different than others, and how it can improve your life. And I think that's much more valuable than actually giving you a tutorial on the subject itself. Now I'm going to assume that everybody that listens to this talk knows what MVC is, so the model view controller, and Laravel also follows that paradigm as so many other frameworks do. Because this is basically something that Taylor brought along from his .NET days, and this is what he was introduced to when he first started working as a programmer. So I'm going to go over all the basic steps that you have through in an MVC framework, and then see how Laravel actually handles these, to give you a clear overview of how the framework works. So the first thing we do is define our routes, define the URLs that you have to go through in the application to actually get through the content that you want to provide to your customers. And that can be done really easily by accessing the static methods that is provided on the routes interface. In this case, the get method. In this case, it's the index, which returns a content hello world in this case, which is really, really very simple, very elegant, very readable. And that is something that you'll see throughout the application as we continue this presentation. So get, as you might expect, is a get request. And on contrast, post is a post request. Really, that's all there is to it. That is the main difference between the two. It's the same functionality, it works exactly the same, but get and post is what is used to define the method that it needs to be sent by the user to access this route. As simple as it can be right there. That's not the only thing, of course. There are also put and delete methods that can be defined in a similar way, and you can also define parameters between those routes as stated here on screen. So it's really easy, really readable, and this is just one of the ways that you can actually define the routes in Laravel, which is really intuitive. Now, usually you wouldn't do that. Usually you wouldn't handle your routes inside an anonymous function, you would actually place those methods inside a controller where you would do the actual processing of the information. And that can be done in this way, where you can actually define your route and then redirect it to a controller and the method on that controller, as you can see here. So the user controller at show profile actually redirects the user to the show profile method on the user controller whenever he accesses that route. So really simple, really intuitive, works amazing. Now once you have the information in your controller, what you want to do is give feedback to the user, and you can do that with a template. For those of you that are familiar with Symphony, they have the Twig templating engine, which is really powerful. Laravel has the Blade templating engine, so it's a different templating engine that Taylor Otwell designed, and it works more or less the same with the same features as Twig has. An example of this is here, the view interface, which you call the make method, which actually makes the view with the name that you specify, which is a dot notation of the directory path where you can actually find that view. And you pass along the parameters, the information, the data that you want to access on that view along with it using the with method. So if you were to actually follow this method, you would see this view, which would be called profile. This would be located in the user's folder with the name profile.blade.php. The engine would automatically pick that up and insert or inject all the values that you specify along with it. So in this case, the ID variable would be printed out on the view as it's shown here on screen. So really intuitive, really easy to work with, and it also makes the code very readable. Now you can also inherit views to make your code more dynamic, same as in Twig, which is done using the yield keyword in Laravel. So the yield method will actually go and look for a section that is defined inside your view, and it will enter the content that is defined within your section inside at that location where the yield command is given. So you can see here a sidebar and a content sections that are specified, and they are filled up in a different view, which inherits the first view that you see here on screen. You don't have to do this, which means you don't have to define these sections. If you don't define them, Blade will automatically know to ignore them. You won't get any exceptions, so that gives you maximum flexibility to easily manipulate and define your views when you're actually going through your application. There's a bunch of other options as well, so all the major operations that you have in PHP are available, so if statements, for each statements, while statements, unless statements, they're all in there. I recommend that you actually look this up on your own time. It's really very straightforward, very easy to read on the Laravel documentation. It's suffice it to say that all the options that you have available in a normal templating engine are available in Blade and work perfectly fine, really interesting to see. And that covers pretty much most of the information. That covers the controller and the view part of the MVC. Now all we need is a model to actually store our data and actually recover it from the database. And that is where Eloquent comes in. And Eloquent is really one of the main contributions that Taylor Otwell made to the PHP world. One of the main selling features of Laravel. It is the ORM. Again, if you look back to the Symphony, it is basically what Doctrine is for Symphony, that is what Eloquent is for Laravel. So it's the connection between your application and your database pretty much. Now the main difference between Eloquent and Doctrine is that Eloquent is an active record implementation, which means that you can actually access data directly on the models, and you have the typical active record methods such as update and save and create are actually made available through the models themselves instead of going through an entity manager as opposed to Doctrine, which is a very, very big change. Some people like it, some people don't. It's up for discussion, but it makes your code very, very readable and very easy to interact with, which is a huge deal for me personally as a developer. Now creating a model is very easy. All you have to do is extend the Eloquent class and define the table to which it relates to. By default, Laravel will assume that you have your table name will be the name of the class plus an S, but you can change the table name to pretty much anything you want, should you wish to. Now, as I said, active record, as you can see right here. So basically, it's very easy to access all the attributes on the model, change them, and save them very intuitively without having to interact with other classes as opposed to Doctrine, for instance. And if you combine that with what we previously saw in the previous examples, in the previous controllers, we now see the totality of the MVC here at work, where you define your route, which is transferred into a controller, which then accesses the data from the database via Eloquent and inserts it into a view back to the user. So that is really the basics of Laravel in a nutshell, is what you see here in front of you. Now, aside from that, Laravel also provides a lot of other interfaces, a lot of other information to the user, because let's face it, this is rarely enough when we're actually making a PHP web application. There's a lot more to this. For instance, you want to know if the user has submitted a request with a particular header. You want to know if the request contains JSON information. These are just a couple of examples that we want to have. And Laravel provides easy interfaces that you can access all of this information in a very easy way via static methods, which is really very powerful. Input, for instance, can be recovered via the input interface, which is a combination of both get and post input filters. And it's easy to recover all of that information with a very easy and intuitive method, rather than having to go through server variables and get variables and everything. So it really makes the code more readable and understandable. Also, you can easily check whether a specific input key exists, rather than having to assume that it exists. So all of those things are made available to you should you need them, should you wish to use them. As well as some utility methods to, for instance, collect all the inputs rather than getting one specifically by name if you don't know them by name. So again, really easy to work with and really easy to use, with a lot of different options that you have available to you as a developer. Validation is another example where Laravel makes it easier for you. So it has a validator interface that you can access to actually make a validator instance, where you can specify both input as well as rules that you want to use to validate that input, as well as messages that you can use to give information or give feedback back to the user when the information that he provided is invalid. Can be easily created using a static interface and be injected inside the controller methods that you have created earlier in a way that is shown here on screen. So you basically collect the information from the user, create your validator, and ask it if the input is correct or not, all via the intuitive methods. In this case, it's failed. There's also a success method. Just very, very easy to work with and very easy to understand by anybody that actually reads this code. Now, has anyone been noticing a theme? So I've been mentioning static methods a lot. And that is actually another one of the main features of Laravel that it has added to its ecosystem, so to speak. These are actually called facades. These are not static methods that you can just access. These are actually facades that provide information that is hidden behind an invisible wall inside the framework, so to speak. So for those of you that don't really know what a facade is basically an interface that hides the actual complexity of the framework behind an easy access window, so to speak. The functionality that you see that hides behind all of the things I just showed you is actually vastly more complicated than what it seems to be, but the facade makes all of these features immediately accessible to you and allows you to actually use them in a very easy way throughout the entire application without you having to worry about bringing in several classes here and there or duplicating code. It's just another way for the framework to actually allow you to easily interact with all the data that you have available to you and make your work as a programmer as easy as possible whenever you're actually working on applications, which is really powerful. And it's exactly, coming back to what I originally said, it's an exact embodiment of what Laravel is actually trying to be. So really providing this easy and enjoyable interface and enjoying experience that you have as a developer to really make it fun to write code again. and I think they're really successful in that. And that is actually one of the first cornerstones that I wanted to bring up, is that it's really developer-oriented. It's really designed to make your life as a developer easier and better to write clean and readable code, not just at this moment right now, but also in the future when you're going to be revisiting this project after two or 3 months when your customer finds a bug or when you have to make a small improvement. So it's really, really amazing at doing this. Now, this is not all. If you look at the internal structure of the application, you also see that many of the components, these are actually the components that are leveraged by the interfaces. So you see that there are a lot of similarities between the interfaces that we just saw, but not all of them. And the facades actually provide easy access to different parts of these components via the facades. But you see that they actually created a lot of different modules for Laravel instead of actually making one big ball of code, which is a very big advantage because you can actually include all of these specific modules inside your applications without having to include the entirety of the framework itself. So each and every single one of these is a module on its own that can be used individually, which is really, really powerful. And the facades are actually the glue that stick these together and build these into the framework, which is really powerful. I've never actually seen this done in a framework on this scale. And that's immediately the second cornerstone, is a modular design of the framework, and they really did this purposely to make it as easy as possible to work with. Now, if you look further on the hood, these are actually dependencies that are mentioned inside the composer of Laravel, and you see a lot of big names coming back. Symphony among them is in there. There's Carbon for dates. There's SwiftMailer for sending emails. So a lot of these core functionalities that are really known inside the PHP world are brought in from other vendors, from even competitors, if you want to call it that. Symphony is a competing framework, and again, that is really purposely done by Taylor Ockwell. And the main reason for that is because of standards. The main reason for that is because of these packages are standards pretty much, which means that they are not the defining features of the framework. They are implemented according to the rules that are provided by a different organization that says, well, when you send an HTTP GET request, this is how the parameters need to be specified. So these rules are set in stone. You can't change them. You can't improve upon this feature because it's always bound by the specific set of rules. And that is why Taylor Ockwell decided that it was really senseless to completely reinvent these components because they already exist. Because Symphony has a very good HTTP standard. They have a good, SwiftMailer has a good mail interface. So instead of re-implementing these, he basically reused code where he could to focus on the key components that make Laravel different. For instance, Eloquent, which is a really good decision, and in my opinion is the third cornerstone of the framework. The reuse of existing code without having to, not doing work for work's sake, but really taking good where it is and making some additional good to make it better. So what are some of these core features if it borrows so much of other frameworks? Well, we already saw Eloquent, and the next one is the IoC Container. And IoC stands for Inversion of Control. And basically how it works in the short version is what you normally do is, in a normal application, you tell a class will actually say which dependencies it needs before it can get started. When you inverse this relationship, you get inversion of control and you get dependency injection, which means that the main application will actually tell will not be responsible for actually instantiating its dependencies, but rather it will be responsible for telling what its dependencies are, and the IoC container will actually make sure that these dependencies are injected dynamically throughout the application, which is a huge advantage because it allows you to dynamically inject classes depending on, for instance, the input that the user provides, which is really, really a powerful feature. Laravel implemented its own IoC container, which is incredibly powerful and gives the developer a lot of power over his application. So to give you a small example, in this case we have a class called foobar, which has a dependency on a class bas in its constructor. Now what you would usually do in traditional application is you would not pass it in as a parameter, but rather you would create a new instance of bas in the constructor. That's how it usually works. In Laravel, on the other hand, the IoC container will detect that you have mentioned the dependency on the class bas inside your constructor, and if you don't actually provide the class yourself, it would automatically know that you have to re-instantiate a new instance of that class and inject it into the foobar class when it is instantiated. So again, really powerful and taking a lot of work out of your hands as a developer. You don't have to worry about your dependencies. The IoC container will actually do this for you, which is a huge hurdle and makes your life as a developer very, very easy. Now, if you want to look at a real-world example, this is how I use this functionality all the time. So in my controllers, I define my repositories, which are actually the classes I use to access my database, as a dependency, and the IoC container will automatically resolve these dependencies and inject an instance of the order repository inside my controller so I can use it whenever I want in the application. So really, really powerful and amazing feature of the framework. And also, although you may not realize it, this is also exactly what the facades do. So in the past, Laravel has gotten a lot of negative feedback because of its use of static methods. People thought that it was actually statically accessing all of these functionalities, while in reality, there is no static accessing at all. All of these methods, these functionalities that you have here inside the application are not statically accessed. They are actually located inside classes behind the scenes. The only thing is that you don't see these classes. You access them through these facades, and the IoC container will actually resolve these dependencies automatically and give you new instances of these classes behind the scenes, so you don't actually have to see it. Just another way of showing you how Laravel actually leverages all these technical know-how and these amazing features to give you as a developer a lot of control over the content that you have inside your application. Another main core feature of Laravel is the fluent query builder. So instead of actually writing the SQL queries yourself, as we were supposed to be doing a couple of years ago, what Laravel actually provides to you is an easy query interface that allows you to dynamically construct your queries in PHP code. And makes it very readable too. So anyone that has some background in computer science, no matter what programming language, will actually be able to understand what you're doing, which is a really neat feature. This is a clear example here. So using the database facade, you select a table and you get all the rows inside that table, and that will actually give you a list of users that you can then use to give the information back to the user on screen. Which is a really simple example. You can also specify queries. So in this case, this is a where you can select all the users where the name equals John in this case, and you can only select the first user, for instance. So instead of getting a list, you would get only one class, which is another utility method that Laravel provides for you. You can also do more complicated things, such as an or where, or even get a very complicated, by giving, in this case, you would do a select statement with a where clause, an or, and then two where clauses between brackets. That is actually what this code would do. So again, really readable and really understandable, even though the queries get actually more complicated step by step. Pretty much every single thing that you can do using a query database are actually available in Eloquent. So you have joins, you have sorting, you have inner joins, left joins, grouping by, all of the things that you can do on SQL, you can actually do on the Fluent Query Builder. And even if you can't, there's a raw method that allows you to inject raw SQL inside your application should it be necessary. For instance, if you define SQL functions yourself inside your database. Perfectly possible to actually do this inside a Fluent Query Builder. Again, a really amazing feature to make your code more reasonable and understandable. Now, the nice thing about this is that Eloquent is actually an implementation of Fluent. Most people don't realize this and start to use the query builder, but the thing is the query builder on itself uses, it returns standard classes with attributes. It doesn't return the actual models. You can do that when you use Eloquent itself. So this is what we had earlier when we use Eloquent to actually find an instance of a user via the database. Now remember, this is actually the same thing as we saw earlier here. In the first example, on the bottom, you actually do a where on the users table with a specific query, which is exactly the same as the middle example, where you do the same thing via Eloquent. The only difference is that in this case, you actually get a user model with its data, so you can actually call methods on that user model, for instance, to activate the user or change its password in this case maybe. So all of the things that I just showed you that you can do on Fluent, you can actually do exactly those same things on Eloquent on user models themselves, which again makes it really, really, really powerful and really easy to work with to access information from the database themselves. Now your relationships between your database is another thing that Eloquent provides to you. So instead of actually specifying that with annotations as you would do in Doctrine, you actually define methods on your class that define how they relate to other models inside your domain. There are several different options. For instance, has1 is a one-to-one relationship between different models. In this case, a user has one phone, and in this case, that would mean that Eloquent would automatically know that it would be searching for a user ID on the phone model. So it actually would create a query that would look for the user ID table in the phone, user ID column inside the phone table of your database to actually access the information really easily for you. There is also the inverse of the relationship that you have to define. In this case, where you specify that the phone actually belongs to the user, which would basically define the same relationship but would allow you to access the information from the other end. So, for instance, the phone can now detect which user it belongs to and stuff like that. So, really intuitive, really easy to use, and this is how you would actually use it. So, and Eloquent would actually resolve all of this automatically for you and return the instance that is stored inside the database without you having to write a single query, which is really amazing. Several different options exist. There are has manys, there are morph relationships. Again, I recommend that you look into this on your own if you're interested. It's really very straightforward, very well explained in the Laravel documentation, and there are a lot of resources available out there that give you a lot of information on this stuff. Because this is really one of the core features of Laravel that make it really so great. So a lot of information out there, be sure to look it up. Another main feature is Artisan. This is actually a console application, so to speak, within a framework. So it's a wrapper around the Doctrine console module. Not the Doctrine, the Symphony console module, for those of you that know that. And actually, it does pretty much what Laravel does every single time. It provides a nice wrapper around a solid piece of functionality to make it more understandable and more easier to work with, really. So the Artisan module, so to speak, allows you to create a bunch of commands which are designed to make your life as a developer easier. So for instance, a couple of things you could do is you could generate, for instance, a controller class with all the resourceful methods available to you. You could publish configuration from a particular package that you want to use. All of these methods are available to you in every single instance of a Laravel application, which I will use them all the time and they're really useful to actually work with. And you can also define your own commands to maximize your own workflow. This package, for instance, is a generator package which was created by Jeffrey Ray, which is one of the main contributors inside the Laravel ecosystem. He created a package that will automatically generate a whole slew of classes related to a particular model. So, for instance, you would want to create a user model, and using the console commands that he provides in his package, he would create a controller, a model, He would create a repository, he would create a migration, you can specify which attributes you want to give to a model, these would all be injected automatically. So really, all of these things that you can do, the possibilities are endless. One main usage for artisan commands that you see most often is actually to run cron jobs. So instead of what I saw previously on a different project was that they would actually call controller methods that were actually accessible from the outside world as well to actually, for instance, delete historical information from a database. What you could do here is specify an artisan command that would actually do that for you, and that would make it impossible for outside users to actually access these functionalities. So really powerful tool that you have at your disposal when you're working with Laravel. Now the next main thing, and again one of the main cornerstones of Laravel, is unit testing. Not a lot of people do this in PHP, which is very sad. But the creators of Laravel, Taylor Rockwell, and the core team that he has right now really thought that this was very important, and this is one of the things that he brought with him from Ruby. If you're a Ruby developer and you say you don't do unit testing, the whole world will scold you. If you're a PHP developer and you don't do unit testing, people will ask you what unit testing is. So that's really one of the things that he brought with him from Ruby and really implemented it into his framework to make this a better place for us all. So this is a very rudimentary unit test as you would see it in a typical PHP project, hopefully a little bit more extended than this. This is a very minimalistic example. But basically you would assert your code to make sure that it is valid to reduce the risk of errors. And that's exactly how you use it in Laravel as well. Now, Laravel makes this so much easier because it gives you a lot of tools available to you to actually allow you to test all aspects of your code. And one of the things that it does that is by leveraging the IoC container. So remember when I showed you this code sample a couple of slides ago, which is where you actually create an instance of a particular class via the IoC container. Now, this would be very hard to test if not for the functionality that Laravel provided to you. Too far back, yeah, that's okay. So what Laravel actually does is it has several methods made available to you on the IoC container that will allow you to specify the mocks or dummy classes that you can inject inside your application when you're running your tests. So you can actually make sure that you don't access information where you don't want it. So you can make sure that you have, you can count, for instance, the number of times you call a particular method on a class and stuff like that. So you can really, previously it was very hard to actually test when you create a new instance. It's really made very easy right now because of the IoC container and because of what you can actually do with it. Also, the Laravel facades are actually testable. So in this code sample, an event would get fired for any particular reason. For instance, you would change a password and you would like to make a notification by email. Previously, that would be very difficult to test, but in Laravel, they actually allow you to specify, how should I say this? They allow you to transform the functionality behind the facade into a mock object. And to do this, Laravel actually leverages mockery by default. So mockery is actually pulled in as a dependency of the framework, and it provides you with the should receive method that is a standard available within the mockery mock, and it allows you to actually work with your facades as you would do a normal mockery mock instance. So it really makes it very easy to mock all of these particular functions that you have available to you, and test all of the different things that you do inside your Laravel application, which is again a really major improvement over other frameworks that I have seen in the past. Makes it really easy to test all aspects of your code and not just these remote ones that don't have any business value at all. Now, these are just a couple of things that Laravel does. There are so many other things that are available. There's authentication, there's pagination, there is really easy migrations. One of the new features is form requests. There's mail integration. All the stuff that you see here on screen, and much more. Sadly, there isn't enough time in a day to actually explain all that there is to know about Laravel. But this is just a tip of the veil, and just a brief introduction to what it can be, and hopefully I've been able to convince you that there is a lot to know about this framework and that it is worth investigating and looking more into. Now, what I will be doing next is actually provide you with that information. Last thing I still owe you, though, is the last cornerstone. We've seen 4 so far. There's actually one more, which is the community and the ecosystem. Of course, every framework itself will claim that its community is the greatest and whatever. I'm not going to argue with that. I'm not going to start a flame war. I am going to talk briefly, though, about the ecosystem. So Laravel is not Laravel the framework and then done with it. It has a lot of tools that come along with it. So instead of sticking to his framework and then being done with it, Taylor Otwell has actually taken the time and he has looked at what did and didn't work with inside the PHP ecosystem. And he has created a bunch of tools that actually allow developers to easily work with his framework. And these are just 4 of the examples that he created. Laravel Hosted, for instance, is a Vagrant box that he created specifically for Laravel development that is tuned to maximize your speed as a developer. It has all the Nginx installation on it. It has Elasticsearch installed by default on it. All of these configurations is pre-generated for you to maximize your efficiency as a Laravel PHP developer. Then Envoyer, which is a application that is created to actually manage the deployment and development on production servers, which is a service that is offered to developers at a small price, which in turn allows Taylor Otwell to work full-time as an open source developer to continue work on Laravel, which is really amazing. Additionally, you have Forge, which is hosting of Laravel servers, and last but not least, you have Lumen, which is a shall we say a miniature version of Laravel, a mini framework that Taylor Otwell released a couple of months ago out of the blue without anyone knowing that he was still working on it. And it's supposed to be, well, not supposed to be, it actually is one of the fastest PHP frameworks available. So it's really a very, very slimmed down version of Laravel with the same main features. So the readability, the flexibility, it's all in there, and it just removed a lot of the overhead to make the application as fast as possible, depending on your needs, whether or not that's possible. Whether it's necessary for your application. So definitely look into that if you have an application that needs to run fast. Like a small API, for instance, Lumen is definitely the thing you want to look into. Now, where to find information? The first step is obviously to go to Laravel.com and check the documentation. Laravel has one of the best documentations in the world of PHP. It has constantly been worked on. Actually, for the last 3 weeks, Taylor has been working nonstop on updating the documentation for Laravel 5.1, and that's actually what we're waiting for, not really the development. Development is complete as far as I can tell. So really check it out. It's really, really readable. It has pretty much all the information there, and it's definitely the best place to get started when you want to work with Laravel. There's also the Laravel.io portal, which is created by the community itself, which used to be the original forum for Laravel, although lately things have been migrating more and more towards Laracasts. Laracast is the brainchild of Jeffrey Way. I've mentioned the name previously, and he is one of the main contributors to the Laravel ecosystem. He is a very, very talented developer. He used to work as a video content creator for Tuts Plus, where he did mainly PHP, also Ruby, and a lot of Laravel videos. And recently he decided to start on his own and start started this Laracast, which is basically a video podcast, if you will, about Laravel in specific and PHP in general. Most of the content is concerned with Laravel, but there are also a lot of screencasts that can be used in every different framework that you want. For instance, there are screencasts on PHP Storm, there are screencasts on Vagrant, PHP Spec for unit testing, ECMAScript 6, Solid, OOP, a whole bunch of stuff is available to pretty much anyone at a very, very reasonable price. Most of these lessons are actually free. Some are paying, but it's definitely worth the money. If you're in PHP, and particularly if you're in Laravel, really, really check this out because it's really worth it. Again, if you want to get started with Laravel, and you want a good tutorial on Laravel 5 or Laravel 4, whichever is your preference, this is the site you want to go through because it has a lot of content freely available for beginners with Laravel, and it's definitely the best place to get started for any information about the framework. Other resources include several very good books that you can read if you're into that kind of stuff. Although the video tutorials on Laracasts have rendered these pretty much obsolete as of late, but they're still out there and it's really, really good content. So worth looking into if you have the time. There are also local meetups. This is a Brussels meetup, which has started a little over a year ago and has had several events in the past. I'm not sure how active they are right now, but it's definitely check that out if you can. And last but not least, there's also LaravelCon, which is a conference that is organized once every year, once in the United States and once in Europe. Completely organized by the community. The core team has some say in it, but definitely not all. I think Taylor Otwell has no idea what's going on in this particular event, which is really amazing. LaravelCon EU is in Amsterdam every single year. I've been to the last 2 editions, and it's a blast. Taylor is there every single year, as well as other members of the core team, and it's definitely worth going to. You can just go up and talk to these guys. They're really, really easy, very nice people too, and you meet a lot of people that are busy with the same things that you are. So it's a really, really nice. If you can go, then definitely you should. That was my presentation. I hope I was able to convince you of the value that Laravel has brought to the PHP community. I'm definitely not going to claim that it is the silver bullet and that it's the best framework or that you should drop whatever you're doing and start working with it. But for me, it is my framework of preference, and I don't think I will be changing to anything else anytime soon. So if you're interested in it, definitely check it out. I believe it will be worth your while. So that'll be it for me. If you want to get in touch with me, these are my credentials. I'd be happy to ask any questions that you might have with regards to Laravel or PHP in general. I'd be more than happy to help. Hope it was worth it. Thanks.